but a foolish samurai warrior wielding a shape-shifting master of darkness, wielding a magic sword, wielding a foolish samurai warrior wielding a magic sword, wielding an unspeakable evil, wielding a foolish shape-shifting
coconut,
wielding a shape-shifting master of darkness, wielding a foolish samurai warrior wielding an unspeakable
coconut,
wielding a magic sword, wielding a shape-shifting sword, wielding an evil sword, wielding a sword, wielding an unspeakable evil, wielding a foolish samurai warrior wielding a shape-shifting master of darkness, wielding a magic sword, wielding a foolish samurai warrior wielding a magic sword, stepped forth to oppose me.
Dark is an awkward type to discuss. In the modern day, it has the reputation of being an offense-focused type due to the high attacking stats of its Pokémon and few other types resisting it. But that isn't quite the full story. Dark actually went on quite the journey to arrive at where it is today. Like Steel, Dark was one of two types added in Gold and Silver. Unlike Steel, however, the developers initially had zero idea what they wanted the Dark type to be. Let's start at the beginning, or rather a bit before that. In the 1997 demo shown at the Japan-exclusive Space World trade show, multiple Dark Pokémon were present, but all of these would be totally changed by the time of eventual release. Girafarig used to be a Dark type with a greater emphasis placed on the evil twin theme, and had both a different design and a creepy pre-evolution named Twinzu. This would be later toned down to a silly tail, and Twins would be reworked into Wobbuffet, with both getting swapped to Psychic. There was a two-stage line of Dark Cats, which might later inspire Purloin and Lightbird. There was a pure Dark single-stage Weasel, which might have been later reworked into Sneasel. However, its odd position in the Dex order between the legendary dogs and Ho-Oh suggests it could possibly have been a legendary. Could this imply there were originally plans for a legendary quartet? Or maybe it's just odd data shenanigans. Houndour and Houndoom were present but were pure fire type. Umbreon was present but was a poison type, explaining its odd Dex entry and defensive stat spread. Tyranitar didn't exist, but it basically doesn't exist in the main game anyway, so not much change there. In fact, the only Dark Pokémon that made it through intact was Murkrow, who just got a nicer hat. So yeah, Murkrow is therefore the original Dark Pokémon, and was the strongest vision for what the type was supposed to be. This wasn't a good sign, and indeed, Dark's eventual implementation implied an uncertain design direction compared to Steel. Dark's original defining trait was to be a direct counterpart to Psychic. Everything Psychic does, Dark does the opposite. Everybody notices the obvious immunity and offensive advantage over Psychic and writes that off as a balancing decision. While that is true, their relationship goes deeper than that, and is actually one of counterparts and opposites rather than predator and prey. Psychic is weak to Ghost, Dark is advantaged over it. Psychic is strong against fighting, Dark is weak to it. Both were resisted by Steel, and both are weak to Bug. Psychic types are special attackers, Dark types are physical. Psychic Pokémon are slow and bulky, Dark Pokémon are fast and frail. This idea of contrast is likely why Umbreon was changed from Poison to Dark, despite retaining the Poison style defensive stat spread. It better emphasizes the day-night contrast with Espeon. In a vacuum, it is not a bad design direction, it just wasn't enough by itself. Dark still lacked a standalone identity, and its Pokémon and moves reflected that. Bite and Crunch were generic attacks, and Feint Attack was a reskinned Swift. Beat Up was a mechanically unique multi-hit move, but dealt typeless damage, making it useless. Only Thief and Pursuit were noteworthy, the former for its involvement with the newly introduced type system, and the latter for being mechanically unique, but also being fairly useless due to in-game opponents never switching. That said, keep these two moves in mind. They are a surprise optimize tool that will help us later. The Pokémon were also all over the place stat-wise. Murkrow was a fast mixed attacker, Houndoom was a special attacker, Sneasel was a fast physical attacker, Umbreon was a pure defensive wall, and Tyranitar was a slow and bulky physical attacker. They covered a wide range of archetypes but did not commit to any single one, nor did they focus on any one stat. In comparison, all fighting types had high attack, all electric types were fast, and all rock and steel types had high defense. The other major issue was lack of availability. Aside from Umbreon, Dark basically doesn't exist in Johto. All the others got shoved into the Kanto postgame. The type also never received a proper introduction like Steel, which had a prominent introductory fight in Jasmine. The series' first Dark representative was Karen, who wasn't even given a full Dark team and was arguably the most disorganized Elite Four in the entire series. Umbreon had an annoying stall set which couldn't stack passive damage. Vileplume could not decide between status attacking or stalling, and debuffed physical defense despite her team being entirely special attackers. And I don't even know what Gengar is trying to do. Only Murkrow and Houndoom were making any sense as direct attackers, but had shuffle moves for whatever reason which provided zero benefit. For comparison, Will focused on defensive setup moves and special attacks, Koga was setting up evasion, confusion, and toxic stall, and Bruno was all no-nonsense direct offense. All the other Elite Four reflected their type's general playstyles in some way. But if Karen was doing the same, then all she said was that Dark was a complete mess. Fortunately, things got much better in Gen 3. Dark became significantly more accessible now, to the point of being a fursuit encounter, and many other Dark Pokémon were also obtainable across all stages of the game. The Pokémon also seem to have settled into a uniform archetype of being glass cannon physical or mixed attackers. Unfortunately, this was still a mess because Dark was a special type, meaning everyone's high attack stat was wasted. Sydney shows us the aftermath. A diverse team full of frail and slow attackers forced into using normal attacks. Definitely a more accurate showcase of the type than Karen though. At least it includes every Dark Pokémon in Hoenn except Sableye, and that's cause Phoebe needs it way more. Aside from stats, however, a secondary identity was being formed. In contrast to how Psychic was gaining random support buffs, Dark received a variety of support debuffs. These were an evolution of the design concept established by Thief and focused on disabling certain actions. Taunt prevents you from using status type moves, Torment prevents you from choosing the same move twice in a row, Snatch denies an opponent's status move, and Knockoff disables your held item. In the future, these will be joined by Embargo, which prevents item usage, Quash disabling speed advantage, and Throat Chop, which disables sound moves. In addition, Dark also gained several stat debuffs. Flatter, Fake Tears, and Memento all manipulated stats with high magnitude and had perfect accuracy. Note that Screech and Metal Sound had similar effects as Fake Tears, but had only 85% accuracy, implying that the Dark version was the superior one. These would later be joined by Parting Shot and Snarl. Lastly, it is worth recognizing that Intimidate appears comparatively often on Dark Pokémon. Depending on whether you include regional forms or megas, Dark Pokémon comprise approximately 22% to 27% of all Intimidate users, which might not be enough to be a trend, but it is at least notable for tying into the type's debuff-focused identity. After all, the first ever Intimidate user in history was a Dark type, and the most famous Intimidate user of today is a Dark type. Mr. VGC, everybody. Sakurai really chose well for his Smash rep. Generation 4 is the point where Dark finally gets good. While every other type benefited from Gen 4's additions of new moves and evolutions, almost all of Dark's improvement stemmed exclusively from the physical special split. Every Dark Pokémon was now able to actually use their much better physical attack to deal damage, meaning they all now properly functioned as glass cannons. Seriously, no other type had this many mismatched attackers. Of course, it'd be inaccurate to claim that Dark didn't also benefit from new moves and evolutions, because it received a third design theme for their moves. Evolving on the concept established by Pursuit, some new Dark moves focused around conditional punishment, and gained extra power if the opponent performs certain actions during that turn. Payback punished them for hitting you, Assurance punished them for using recall moves, and of course, Sucker Punch punished them for attacking. In the future, they would be joined by Foul Play, which punished them for having high attack, Lash Out, which punished them for lowering your stats, and Knock Off, which was updated to have a higher base power and deal increased damage if they hold items. Many new Dark Pokemon explored these archetypes in different ways. Some were straightforward attackers like Honchkrow and Crocodile, some were debuff supporters like Liepard and Sableye, and some were a mix of both like Scrafty and Pangoro. Then there's Mr. VGC, who just does everything. Why is its move pool so big? Dark Pokemon weren't limited by their traditional physical glass cannon stat spread either. Unlike how fighting stuck with physical offense and Steel stayed defensively oriented, some delved into special attacking like Hydreigon, some were bulky attackers like Bisharp and Obstagoon, and some became tanks like Mandibuzz and Spiritomb. Even those who stayed as glass cannons had some gimmick to them, like Zoroark and its illusion shenanigans, or Greninja and its ability to become not a Dark type. As the game shifted away from super effectiveness to spamming stab, Dark's non-interactive type interactions rose in value. Similar to Ghost, Dark moves became very spammable due to so few types resisting it. Meanwhile, defensively, having an immunity and only 2 weaknesses made it surprisingly solid. Basically, there was nothing which Dark as a type could not do. If you had a physical electric type, special fighting type, or slow defensive ice type, they'd perform awfully due to being contradictory to their type's design ideologies. Dark isn't like that. It's able to perform in any archetype with any stat spread, regardless of whatever type it's paired up with. Take Honchkrow and Mandibuzz for instance. One is a glass cannon while the other is a pure tank, but the type itself proves beneficial for both roles. Dark Fire also works well for the special attacking Houndoom and Mr. VGC, who does everything except special attacks. This incredible versatility resulted in an impressive competitive track record, because Dark Pokemon could always perform at their intended role as long as they had the stats for it. This eventually got to be a bit much, and Dark received a nerf in Gen 6. The new Fairy type has an offensive and defensive advantage over Dark, impacting Dark Pokemon of all kinds. However, it was the only type to receive compensation. It was no longer resisted by Steel. In addition, Knockoff's power was raised from 20 to 65, and it now dealt 50% more damage upon successfully knocking off an item, making it into a hybrid of offense and support utility. These opened up many new opportunities for offensive Dark types, though it's definitely a net nerf overall and brought Dark's versatility down a notch. The biggest winners were those who had secondary typings which let them negate the Fairy weakness, like Bisharp or Drapion, or were supporters. The nice thing about being a support specialist is that stats and weaknesses are unimportant. They weren't dealing damage or surviving hits anyway. Sableye, Murkrow, Liepard, and Grimmsnarl all had questionable stats, but Prankster means it doesn't matter and Foul Play still gives them a bit of a punch. Prankster itself also validates Dark's debuff-centric identity, as in Gen 7, Prankster's priority boosted moves were updated to fail against Dark types, meaning you could switch King Gambit into a priority Thunder Wave and nothing would happen. Bear in mind, Prankster itself isn't disabled. You can still activate supportive buffs like Reflect or Calm Mind. Only status moves which target an opponent get blocked. In other words, debuffs. It's pretty funny how Game Freak went out of their way to nerf Dark's offensive and defensive capability, only to buff its supportive and utility aspects just one generation later. Just goes to show how important they consider debuffs to be for Dark's mechanical identity. Sure is a good thing that these debuffers don't have good offensive or defensive stats, right? Fast forward to the present day and we are back in Dark Dominance. Scarlet and Violet introduced 12 new fully evolved Dark Pokemon, 3 being Paradoxes and 4 being a new legendary quartet. That's a lot of Dark Pokemon. Not all of them would go on to have a major casual or competitive presence, but with this many, it's inevitable that some do. From an incredibly confused start to a self-contradictory design identity to top of the meta, it's been a long journey, full of buffs, nerfs, nerfs and everything in between, but it's a fruitful one. And if Dark's track record is any indication, it will only keep getting better as time goes on. At the very least, this guy won't be going anywhere anytime soon. 10 types down so far, we're in the end game now. Which comes next? Feel free to suggest. I'm sure you've got a favorite dark type. We've all been through that edgy teenage phase where stuff like Absol looked like the coolest things in the world. I liked Zoroark too back when I was young and foolish. Don't be shy, share your teenage cringe. Any other thoughts? If so, let me know in the comments. I always read every single one. YouTube always notifies me.